Admiral Xolvar of the Threxian fleet stood at the entrance of Earth's Academy of Stellar Command, the metallic folds of his ceremonial armor gleaming under the soft lights. Around him, human officers waited with polite smiles, careful to mask their unease. Xolvar was taller than any of them by at least 2 heads, his deep-set violet eyes scanning every corner of the Grand Hall. He had traveled across 6 star systems to attend this diplomatic visit, a gesture of goodwill between the Threxian Dominion and the rising human civilization. In truth, Xolvar expected little from this encounter. Humanity was still a young species, barely a few generations into the age of interstellar travel. They had heart, yes, and a stubbornness that had caught the galaxy's attention, but what could they truly know of war? Real war, fought not over decades but centuries. His taloned fingers brushed the side of his translator device as a human commander approached. "Admiral Xolvar," the man said with a crisp salute, "welcome to the Academy. We are honored by your presence." Xolvar offered a brief nod, a gesture of distant politeness. His mind was elsewhere, already forming judgments as he observed the humans bustling around. Young cadets in polished uniforms, instructors calling out commands, holographic star maps blinking along the walls. It was all impressive in a way, but there was an edge of newness to it. It lacked the hardened polish of a species who had clawed their way through millennia of galactic struggles. He followed his guide through wide corridors lined with banners of Earth's earliest expeditions, Luna Base, the Mars colonies, the jump gate at Proxima Centauri. Prideful achievements, but in Xolvar's mind, they were still stepping stones. Humanity had not yet faced the full weight of cosmic politics, the ruthless wars that define the oldest empires. "Today we thought you might enjoy observing our advanced training modules," the guide said, leading him toward a large set of doors. "We've integrated tactical learning into our early education programs." Xolvar let out a soft, amused breath. Training modules. He imagined rows of adolescents stumbling through basic maneuvers, perhaps launching a few simulated missiles at each other in chaotic games. He had seen such things before on countless worlds, always with the same outcome: enthusiastic, undisciplined, and ultimately predictable. The doors parted with a quiet hiss, and Xolvar stepped inside a darkened chamber filled with floating screens and control consoles. Holographic projectors cast shimmering images of starfields and distant battles. Rows of simulators stretched across the room, but today, only one was active. At the center, perched on a seat far too large for them, was a human child. Xolvar paused, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the room. A child. Alone. The boy, or perhaps girl, Xolvar was not certain of the subtle differences in human youth, was engrossed in the simulator, fingers dancing across the controls with surprising speed. A digital starship, sleek and silver, maneuvered through a complex battlefield projected all around them. The admiral tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Perhaps this would be more entertaining than he thought. Perhaps, he mused, it would even be amusing. He did not yet realize how quickly his amusement would turn into something else entirely. Xolvar's eyes lingered on the small figure before him. The child was engrossed in the holographic battlefield, their hands a blur as they manipulated the starship with fluid precision. The simulator, a high-tech piece of human engineering, projected enemy ships on all sides, swarming like angry hornets, eager to tear the human vessel apart. But the child was unbothered. Their focus was sharp, unyielding. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, as if the child had already played out every possible scenario in their mind. Xolvar blinked, momentarily taken aback. He had seen many skilled tacticians across the galaxy, some even from his own fleet. But this was something else entirely. The child's starship danced through a chaotic asteroid field, narrowly avoiding debris with expert maneuvering. A barrage of enemy fire lit up the digital sky, but the ship tilted and swerved with ease, dodging every shot as if it were part of some intricate dance. Xolvar, still standing near the doorway, felt a sense of growing unease ripple through him. The child was not simply playing. They were commanding the ship. Every decision seemed so deliberate, as if the child were facing a real battle. In the simulation, a massive Threxian warship appeared. It was one of Solvar's own designs, a vessel he had commanded in numerous conflicts. The digital ship was a striking replica of the model he had once used to tear through entire fleets. Solvar couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. It was a magnificent ship, swift, powerful, capable of overwhelming almost any adversary. The child's eyes flickered toward it, calculating. Solvar saw them hesitate for just a moment, fingers hovering over the controls. But then, with remarkable confidence, the child engaged. The human ship darted forward, closing the gap between the two vessels with terrifying speed. There was no hesitation in the movement, no fear. The child was acting like a seasoned commander, instinctively knowing what to do. The Threxian ship's digital weapons fired, a devastating barrage of plasma rounds. The child's ship swerved at the last possible second, just out of range of the attack, and then countered with a series of missiles that struck the Threxian vessel's engines, causing it to spiral out of control. Solvar felt a sharp pulse of surprise, quickly followed by disbelief. The child had just executed a perfect tactical move, one that any battle-hardened admiral would have taken decades to master. A move that, on a real battlefield, would have destroyed a fleet much stronger than the one they had faced. But the child wasn't finished. As the Threxian ship careened through space, the child's ship locked onto it, firing a devastating pulse of energy that tore through the warship's defenses. Solvar's eyes widened in horror as the digital ship exploded into a brilliant fiery ball. The child didn't celebrate. They merely adjusted their seat and focused again, preparing for the next wave of enemies. Solvar stared, stunned. This was no child's game. The level of tactical genius on display was far beyond what he expected from any human, let alone one so young. The child's movements were flawless, their mind working faster than anything Solvar had seen. It wasn't play. It wasn't an experiment. This was something real, something deadly. Before he could gather his thoughts, the instructor beside him spoke, his voice casual, almost matter-of-fact. "They're all like that, sir. All are children. They learn quickly. By the time they're this age, they're already advanced in their tactical simulations." Solvar turned to look at the instructor, his mind still reeling. He couldn't process what he had just witnessed. But one thing was certain now. Humanity's potential in war was no longer something to be underestimated. And this child, this simple, unassuming human, was a living example of what was to come. Solvar stood motionless, his violet eyes fixed on the child in the simulator. The battle raged on around them, digital explosions filling the air. The child's fingers never faltered, never wavered, as if they had lived through this exact sequence 1,000 times. Every action, every move, was done with purpose, with confidence. The admiral's amusement, which had been fleeting, began to fade. What he had initially dismissed as nothing more than a child playing a simple game now seemed more like a carefully orchestrated operation. Solvar had spent centuries observing the finest tacticians in the galaxy, those who had mastered the intricacies of battle, the nuances of war. But this child, this human, this was something different. A new wave of enemy ships appeared on the screen, their sleek forms swarming toward the human vessel. The child's ship was outnumbered, surrounded on all sides, and yet it was moving with a grace that belied its size. The child reacted instantly, the ship's systems flashing as they adjusted speed, rerouted energy, and prepared countermeasures. Solvar felt a shift in his chest. This wasn't the frantic scrambling he had expected from a child. This was precise, calculated, a deliberate act of war. Each decision had been made in the blink of an eye, and each had led to another victory. Solvar could see it now. The child wasn't just reacting to the battle. They were controlling it, as if the stars themselves were their playthings. The admiral's gaze hardened. The last wave of ships was on the attack, flanking the human ship from both sides. Solvar's hand instinctively moved to the controls on his wrist, wanting to take command, to issue an order. But then he paused. The child wasn't panicking. There was no frantic scrambling. The ship's weapons, now fully charged, fired with surgical precision. The child's ship targeted the enemy's weak points, their engines, their shields, their weapons. One by one, the ships were eliminated, each explosion rippling through the digital universe. The child didn't miss a single shot. Not once. Zolvar felt an unsettling chill crawl down his spine. He had seen entire fleets of seasoned warriors crumble under less pressure. Yet here was a child, seemingly without effort, dismantling everything in their path. It didn't make sense. Humans, he had been taught, were a species of quick learners, yes, but they were also brash, impulsive. They lacked the patience, the cold precision of the ancient empires. Yet here they were, on full display. As the last enemy ship was destroyed, the child's ship emerged from the carnage, unscathed, victorious. The digital field faded, and the simulator powered down with a quiet hum. The child leaned back in their chair, stretching their arms above their head, completely unfazed, as if they hadn't just dismantled an entire fleet in a matter of minutes. The child's gaze drifted over to Solvar, who stood silently, still processing what had just occurred. "Want to try again?" The child asked casually, as if this were the most normal thing in the universe. Solvar didn't answer immediately. His mind raced. What he had just witnessed was not some child's game. This wasn't innocent play or imaginative fantasy. This was a masterclass in strategy, executed by someone barely old enough to hold a weapon, let alone command a fleet. His eyes narrowed as he turned toward the instructor, who seemed completely unfazed by the performance. The instructor nodded with a half-smile, as though this were all completely routine. "This is what all our children go through, Admiral. By the time they're this age, they can run simulations like seasoned commanders." Zolvar's jaw tightened. His pulse quickened. This wasn't just some training exercise. Humanity was preparing for something far more significant than he had ever imagined. Solvar's thoughts whirled as he watched the child stretch and casually rise from the simulator chair. His gaze lingered on the empty space where the holographic battlefield had just been. The Admiral couldn't shake the unease that clung to him like a shadow. The child was smiling now, a simple, carefree expression, completely unaware of the magnitude of what they had just done. They were no different from any other human child in appearance, yet in that moment, they were something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. "Are you ready for the next round?" the child asked, turning back to the controls with a casual flick of their hand, as if engaging in a playful activity. Zolvar's voice was colder than he intended when he spoke, the question escaping before he could fully consider the consequences. "How long have you been practicing this?" The child didn't hesitate. "Since I could walk. My parents say it's a good way to develop quick thinking. And they always let me play with the advanced systems," they said, their tone casual, as though discussing any other childhood hobby. "But we do simulations all the time. Everyone does." Zolvar's mind reeled. Since they could walk, how could a child so young have acquired such a high level of tactical awareness? It was almost as if they were born to command. The Admiral stepped closer, his massive form casting a shadow over the child, who didn't flinch. He peered over the controls, analyzing the simulation's readout on the side screen. The data was almost incomprehensible. It wasn't just the child's speed. It was their approach to the problem itself. Where others might have hesitated, taking unnecessary risks or seeking escape routes, this child took advantage of every possibility. Every gravitational pull, every debris field, every available resource. It was all meticulously exploited, turning the tide of battle in their favor. Zolvar's brow furrowed. There was no mistake in the way the child commanded the simulation. This wasn't random. This wasn't simply instinct. The child was systematically breaking down the enemy's strengths, then exploiting their weaknesses with precision. It was the kind of strategy he had seen only in the most experienced generals. And yet, this child's mind was operating on a level far beyond what even his veteran officers could achieve. "Do you ever make mistakes?" Solvar asked, his voice low. The child glanced at him, then smiled, a glint of amusement in their eyes. "I make mistakes, sure, but I learn from them. I usually don't make the same mistake twice. That's the point, right?" Solvar said nothing, his thoughts swirling. He had to admit it now. This wasn't just child's play. This was something more, something that went far beyond any training program he had ever encountered. And the more he observed, the more it sank in. Humanity was building something far more dangerous than Solvar had ever imagined. A fleet of commanders, each born with the potential to outthink even the most battle-hardened strategist. They weren't simply preparing for the future, they were shaping it, with every game, every simulation, and every step of their lives. The instructor spoke again, as if reading his mind. "It's not just the children, Admiral. It's the culture. Humanity teaches its people to be ready for the future, to think like commanders from an early age. They don't wait for war to prepare for it." Zolvar's heart beat a little faster. There it was, the quiet revelation he had been avoiding. Humans didn't just live for the present, they were constantly training for the future. They were training to dominate, not simply survive. And now, standing before him, was the clearest example of that philosophy. He stared down at the child again. No, it wasn't just one. The Admiral now saw it clearly. Humanity was preparing an entire generation, an entire species, to rule the stars. Solvar's mind was still reeling from the child's performance, but the deeper he looked, the clearer it became. This was no fluke. It wasn't just this one child. It wasn't just the simulators. There was something far more intricate at play. He turned to the instructor, his voice steady, but laced with underlying tension. "You said all children are trained in this manner. How many of them possess this ability?" Solvar asked, though he already suspected the answer. He didn't expect an average response. The instructor seemed unfazed, almost as though he had answered the question 1,000 times before. "All of them. Every child goes through the same training. They all start young, with basic exercises, and then move on to more complex simulations as they grow. It's part of our educational system." Zolvar's brow furrowed as he tried to process the implications. Every human child. There was no way that could be true. No species, no matter how adaptable, could develop such skill in every single individual. It simply wasn't possible. Yet, as he continued to observe the child, sitting there with a relaxed posture, unaffected by the complexity of the simulation, the pieces began to fall into place. "What you're saying is that every child, every human, is trained to this level," Solvar repeated slowly, trying to wrap his mind around the idea. "From the moment they can walk." The instructor nodded. "Yes, it's not just combat skills. It's strategic thinking, problem-solving, teamwork, and leadership. We have a very different approach to learning here on Earth. From the moment they're born, we teach them to prepare for whatever might come. Our entire society is based on forward thinking." Solvar's gaze shifted back to the child, who was now leaning back in their chair, eyes closed in thought, as though they had just finished reading a complex tactical manual. "And these children," he continued, his voice low, "they're prepared to lead, to command, to think beyond the immediate, to conquer." The instructor paused, clearly understanding the direction Solvar was headed. Yes, to think, adapt, and plan beyond what's in front of them. It's a philosophy that permeates our entire culture. We don't wait for the challenges to come. We anticipate them and train our children to lead the way. Zolvar's thoughts collided. A species that didn't just react to the universe around them. They shaped it. They were preparing not only to survive, but to dominate. The child's effortless mastery of the simulator wasn't just an anomaly. It was a product of an entire society's belief in proactive preparation. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a plan. His mind returned to his earlier thought. Humanity was not trying to catch up to the rest of the galaxy. No, they were positioning themselves to lead it, to outthink, outmaneuver, and ultimately reshape the galaxy in their image. As the instructor spoke on about the human philosophy of training, Solvar's gaze didn't leave the child. The child was calm, unfazed, as if all of this, the admiral's visit, the growing realization of humanity's strength, was just another day in the life of a future commander. But to Solvar, it was something far more dangerous. It wasn't just the child who was prepared. It was their entire race. Solvar stood in the quiet hum of the training chamber, his thoughts whirling. The instructor's words, the child's performance, the seamless integration of tactical genius into every human being, it was all starting to settle in. This wasn't just some minor development in human society. It was a revolution in the making. As the child moved away from the simulator, their gaze casually flicking up to Solvar's towering form, a chilling realization settled over the admiral. Humanity wasn't just a species with a potential for greatness. They were already on the cusp of something more, a rapid, unstoppable evolution into a race of tactical and strategic prodigies. And the worst part, they didn't even realize it themselves. They were only at the beginning. Solvar's mind reeled with the implications. Every species in the galaxy, including his own, had relied on a lengthy period of adaptation when faced with new threats, new challenges. Even the Threxians, with their vast military might and centuries of warfare, had been forced to evolve slowly over time. But humans were different. They had something ingrained in their very nature, a relentless drive to push forward, to conquer. Solvar had been trained in the arts of war for countless cycles, but even now, he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. Humans were no longer the young, naive species he had once written off. They were no longer the harmless, eager explorers he had assumed them to be. They were a species bred for conflict, for strategy, for leadership. And Solvar now knew, deep in his gut, that humanity had the potential to outthink and overpower every other race in the galaxy. The instructor's voice broke his thoughts. "Admiral, would you like to try a simulation yourself? Perhaps test your own skills against one of our top students?" Solvar didn't immediately respond. The idea of engaging in a simulation was absurd. He had commanded real fleets in actual battles, witnessed the devastation of entire worlds, and led armies through galactic wars. A simulation, even one as advanced as this, seemed beneath him. But then he remembered the child, the effortless way they had taken down fleet after fleet, the way their fingers had danced across the controls, each move deliberate, with no hint of hesitation. He had been watching a prodigy, a rare mind that could reshape the course of a war with a single thought. Maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to test himself against a human simulation, to see if what he had witnessed was a fluke or a harbinger of something much darker. "Yes," Solvar said, his voice firm. "I'll try." The instructor didn't show any surprise, only nodding as he brought up a new set of parameters for the simulation. Solvar stepped toward the controls, his mind already analyzing the battlefield layout. The child had set a standard, one that Solvar now felt compelled to challenge. The simulation began, and Solvar's fingers moved swiftly over the console, directing his digital fleet with the precision that had defined his career. The battlefield erupted in fire and chaos as enemy ships materialized from the shadows of the asteroid field. Solvar's warships, sleek and formidable, responded immediately, launching a barrage of missiles toward the enemy's formation. He felt the familiar rush of command, the thrill of orchestrating destruction. But something felt off. The enemy ships were dodging in ways he hadn't expected. They were reacting too quickly, too efficiently. His fleet continued to fire, but something was missing. Every time Solvar thought he had the upper hand, the enemy moved with uncanny precision, exploiting his ship's weaknesses. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. This wasn't just a simulation. It was the child's mind at work again. Zolvar's hands froze over the controls as the digital warships he commanded were systematically destroyed, one by one. There was no honor in it, no victory, no pride, just the overwhelming feeling of defeat. His fleet was gone, wiped out in a matter of minutes. And all the while, the child's laughter echoed in the background, light and innocent, as if it were all part of some great cosmic joke. Zolvar stood silently as the simulation ended. His fleet, once strong and composed, had been decimated in mere minutes. The final, crushing blow came swiftly, as his flagship was overtaken by a series of perfectly timed digital maneuvers. The child had done it again. Without even breaking a sweat, they had dismantled his strategy as though it had been nothing more than a child's game. The room was eerily quiet now, save for the hum of the simulator's cooling systems. Zolvar's heart beat heavily in his chest, the weight of his defeat pressing down on him. He hadn't lost a battle like this in centuries. He hadn't even expected to lose. As he turned away from the console, the child's voice broke the silence. "You almost had me," they said casually, a small, teasing smile on their face. "But you weren't quick enough. You didn't think about how I'd counter your next move." Zolvar stared at the child for a long moment, his mind still in shock. The arrogance, the certainty with which they spoke, it was as though they had already won the war, not just the simulation. It wasn't just that the child had outplayed him. It was the manner in which they approached the game. They knew what he would do before he did it. They understood his strategy, anticipated it, and executed a counterattack with ruthless precision. "You?" Zolvar's voice faltered, an unfamiliar sense of frustration rising within him. "How did you know what I was going to do?" The child shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. "It's simple. You relied too much on your strengths. You didn't adjust when I adapted. You stuck to what worked for you in the past. But I don't think like that. I'm always looking ahead, thinking about what's coming next." Zolvar clenched his fists at his sides, his mind racing. This wasn't just a defeat. This was something more profound. The child didn't just anticipate his moves. They thought several steps ahead, seeing patterns in the chaos of the battlefield where others saw only confusion. They had read him like an open book, and that ability, the ability to constantly outthink, to always stay one step ahead, was the true weapon that humanity had developed. Zolvar had fought in wars for centuries, and yet, standing there in the quiet aftermath of this digital engagement, he realized that the battle wasn't what he thought it was. The true war had already begun. Humanity was no longer fighting with mere weapons or armies. They were fighting with their minds. Their children were being raised to be future leaders, not just soldiers. They were being trained to think, to adapt, and to overcome obstacles before they even appeared. And worst of all, these children were everywhere. They were in every corner of human society, their minds honed for victory. "How many others are like you?" Zolvar asked quietly, the words barely escaping his lips. He had to know. He had to understand the full scale of what he was up against. The child paused, considering the question before answering. "Thousands, maybe more. We all go through the same training, the same simulations. It's just the way we learn. Every child knows what it means to lead, to think like a commander. Every one of us." Zolvar turned away, his mind consumed with the enormity of the revelation. It wasn't just one child, one prodigy. This wasn't some isolated phenomenon. This was an entire generation of humans, each one being shaped into the ultimate strategist, each one capable of commanding a fleet with the same ease that they played a game. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. He had underestimated them. The future of war wasn't about numbers, strength, or firepower. It was about something much deeper, about the mind. And the humans were mastering it faster than any of them could have imagined. Zolvar's thoughts darkened. He had seen the future, and it was terrifying. Zolvar stood alone in the silence of the training room, the faint hum of the systems, the only sound in his ears. His hands were still clenched tightly, his mind processing the full weight of what he had learned. The child's words echoed in his thoughts, each one a heavy reminder of just how little he truly understood about humanity's capabilities. The galaxy had always been a place where the strong rose to power, those with the largest fleets, the most powerful weapons, the sharpest tactics. But this was something entirely different. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their fleets or their weapons. It was their minds. The way they thought, the way they learned, the way they adapted. And it was clear now that they were doing it at a pace that no one could keep up with. Zolvar had been bested in a simulation by a child, a single human among billions. And yet that child had shown him everything. The truth about humanity's future. He looked over at the child, who was still watching him, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of their lips. They weren't gloating, but there was something in their eyes, something that made Zolvar realize they had known all along what would happen. They had expected him to fail, expected him to underestimate them. The instructor stepped forward, his voice breaking the silence. "Admiral, you've witnessed firsthand what we are capable of. This is the next generation of leaders, commanders, and tacticians. What you saw today is only a glimpse of what we will become." Zolvar turned slowly, his gaze locking with the instructor's. "I see now. You've been preparing for this, preparing for war, but not in the way I imagined. You're training minds to fight before the battle even begins." The instructor nodded. "Exactly. We don't wait for the fight to come to us. We make sure we're always one step ahead. It's in our culture, in our very nature. And now we're ready for whatever comes. We will shape the future. No one else will." Zolvar's chest tightened as he processed the implications. The human race wasn't just preparing for war, they were preparing to control it, to change the very nature of conflict itself. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to dominate. His mind flickered back to the countless species he had encountered, the countless worlds he had seen fall to the weight of military might. Every time, the story had been the same. A few powerful empires ruled the galaxy, each one vying for control. But now, humanity was different. They weren't trying to conquer. They were changing the game. "We will be ready," the instructor continued, a calm certainty in his voice. "And when the time comes, we will lead." Zolvar turned away, his eyes scanning the horizon beyond the training room's windows. The stars stretched out before him, vast, endless, and now increasingly uncertain. The future had shifted. It was no longer in the hands of those with the most ships or weapons. It was in the hands of those who could outthink everyone else. For the first time in centuries, Zolvar felt a cold, unsettling fear. He had witnessed the rise of countless empires, watched many factions attempt to claim the galaxy as their own, but never had he seen a race so poised for transformation, so ready to upend everything. Humanity had learned faster than anyone expected, and the day would come when they would use that knowledge to reshape the universe in their image. Zolvar's pulse quickened as he walked toward the exit, his mind still reeling. He had once believed his people were the future of the galaxy. Now, he knew the truth. Humanity wasn't just the future. They were already here, and they were unstoppable.